from Normal Word Podcast with Dr. Marcin Nazaruk.
And so I'm curious what happened next, because that was your individual journey and transformation, right? But then I assume you had to apply it somehow or bring it to your business.
Yeah, so if I had to encapsulate the first challenge was me. And that challenge was, as I said, essentially changing my skin. And I knew that because it was so difficult for me, that if I had to sell this now to my bosses or the people above me, it was going to be just as difficult, if not more difficult. So that was my second challenge. How do I convince the leader, my boss, who
Mhm.
are senior leaders who run the organizations? How do I convince them that what HOP is really a fundamental shift in the organization, for safety? And it first started with, well, my first boss, when I came across HOP, he is a servant leader. So the conversations we had first starting to plant the seeds of HOP was really about HOP takes, the view of what Bob Edwards says is industrial empathy. It kind of puts ourselves as leaders into the shoes of the people that have their hands on the equipment and the tools that are the ones getting injured. And that was the conversation that I had with him. And unlike me, he was an avid reader and into things like podcasts. So I just started to drip feed him, these little articles or send a podcast or two. And he also came on board very quickly, but he trusted me as a practitioner, that even though I wasn't sure how it was going to manifest in the organization, he trusted my competence to say, okay, this is something I stand behind. You go do it. If you have any issues or challenges, we'll work through it. But it was sort of swimming in jello initially. Like, I didn't know how this thing was going to manifest itself. But I knew, Boston, without a shadow of a doubt, it was going to be a game changer. And I
Mhm.
had to help him and then help myself move along. So that was
Mhm.
my first boss. When I took this job, actually, before I even accepted the job, I did a presentation with my current boss to say, this is what I believe in HOP. I cannot go back. And if
Mhm.
if you and I are not on the same space with this, then maybe this is not an opportunity that I would take, because I don't
Mhm.
think I can go back to the old ways of, only when things go wrong and lagging indicators and punitive approaches and those things. So he also took a huge leap of faith on me. And he was willing to, use HOP in the organization, even though he himself didn't know what it was. And ironically, has become more of an advocate than I am, as well. So those two leaders, I would say, Martin, I was really, really lucky on.
Mhm.
They acted as sponsors. They acted as intermediaries when I could not get past certain other leaders
Mhm.
that were my peer level, but reported to them, because HOP is not easy for leaders. It is not easy for practitioners. If you believe in command and control, if you believe in controlling people, HOP is an extremely difficult concept,
Mhm.
and some people cannot get over it.
Mhm.
And in our case, I needed their authority and their sort of influence to say, okay, even though you may not believe in this, we are going this way. And
Mhm.
they did that for me, and continue to do so. My current boss continues to support 100%, or even more, with HOP. And in my current organization, again, I had to start very, 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 very small, in drips. So I did a presentation to the board ops committee, because we do have foreign shareholders, to say, okay, here's what HOP is. Here's what I think it will do for the organization. And then I did presentations for the management team and the superintendents, and to say, here's what HOP is, here's the 5 principles. So we spent a lot of time not talking about the what of HOP, but the
Mhm.
why of HOP.
Mhm.
We spent almost a year and a half, and then the pandemic hit. But we spent a lot of time talking about why, because it is such a fundamental shift in thinking
Mhm.
and looking at things. You have to take the time to meet leaders where they are.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, we have taught them the same things we have learned, right? That when things go wrong, that's when you look for all the causal factors, that lagging indicators in some cases, recordable injury frequency rates, and those can predict or pattern things and can tell you. So we I have to pull away from all those things and start to say, okay, well, here's the change. So I did spend a lot of time with the leadership and drip feeding them the information. And while doing that as well, in the background, I very subtly started to use things that we already had in play, but change the language a little bit.
Mhm.
So a good example is, after like an incident or major events, we would do like a lessons learned bulletin, the cliche.
Mhm.
So I started to change the language from not just, what happened, but what did we learn and what went well, what
Mhm.
systems work. Because when you have incidents or accidents, it doesn't mean that everything has not worked. There are things that have worked. Um, so little things like that, just to change the language in the
Mhm.
organization. And I think that is the biggest vehicle for HOP. It is changing the language in the organization, because language is sort of the vehicle of leaders.
Mhm.
It is what leaders use to really sort of multiply messages in the organization, and that is the biggest lever.
Mhm. Wow, very, very impressive and fantastic. And thank you for being so specific with your sharing your actions that you've done. I can see our listeners taking that and perhaps trying to replicate what you've done. Thank you. And then what happened next?
So as we go into the organization with HOP, it sounds good in the why, and it sounds good when you start to roll it out. But when incidents happen and you are tested, that's when you know where the rubber hits the road. And we had several stumbling blocks where certain leaders could not come to terms with or understand what was the difference between discipline and accountability. When we had an incident, why we had to slow them down, to respond and not react, and not talk in the language of blame. So it wasn't all hunky dory. We did
Mm,
have a few missteps. There are some leaders that, despite all the work that was done, because it's so, I would say, in their fabric, it's really hard to break. And that's where having the leader sponsor helps, because we've had several, sort of interventions or times where I've said to my boss, I said, look, we have not gone to the point of no return with HOP yet. And after that point of no return, I'm really afraid of, when leaders don't share the language, it will destroy all the good and actually destroy trust
mhm,
that HOP helps build. So I said, so there were at least 2 conversations I've had with him in the past, well, couple years, to say, okay, we are not at the point of no return. Do you want to stop where we are? Because once we get to the point of no return, it it is the point of no return.
Mhm.
And, he said, nope, we're going. And he's had several sort of um, come to Jesus discussions at the management team. He uses this term. He says, well, the toothpaste is out of the tube. We are on this HOP journey. We are going. We've seen the benefits. So let us get on board. So that is why it's so important to have a senior sponsor, because you're gonna get difficult moments. You're gonna sometimes go back a few steps, and that's okay. Because I'm not too concerned with the short term. I'm looking
Mhm.
long term, and I'm okay with the setbacks in the
Mhm.
short term.
Mhm.
But it is just something that you have to be aware of. And just also to say, Martin, that is not, I am not immune to that. So recently, um, we had an incident, not an incident, but a issue where a guy was buffing a line. So of course I'm on a process plant and there's different levels of height. And somebody took a picture of him sitting on top of the handrail, um, about 20 feet up, no fall protection, right? So when you
Mhm.
look at the picture and you look at the angle, it looks as if just somebody sitting on a handrail.
Right.
And my first reaction was I didn't say anything, but my first reaction by email, which I think maybe was not appropriate, was, this is not acceptable. Please stand on the job. Let us understand what happened,
Mhm.
right? That was my response. But I figured in my words, this is
Mhm.
not appropriate. It led to certain kind of like, oh, ooh, Anyway, long story short is when the contractor and my team did the review, um, he was trying to get a line that was difficult to access, and the only
Mhm.
way he could have gotten to it comfortably was to kind of perch on top of the handrail.
Mhm.
Um, so trying to get the job done, not really understanding that, in doing so, he was putting himself at risk or whatever, right? So context is
Mhm.
everything.
Mhm.
And we worked with the contractor, etc. But I also have to manage my own,
Mhm.
because sometimes I'm like, no, I want to react. So I
Mhm.
have to kind of watch my own expressions and
Mhm.
and check myself, because I'm not immune to the default of React as well. So that happened a few weeks ago. Uh, so that was the other challenge, that just some leaders, you're not going to get them fully on board.
Mhm.
um, but you need the sponsor to help align
Mhm.
with them, so that even though they don't believe it, they need to talk the talk to the rest of the organization,
Mhm.
because we are all on this page and this journey.